It's long past time we end the forever wars, which have cost us untold blood and treasure. I have long argued that we should bring home the vast majority of our combat troops from the wars in Afghanistan and the Middle East and narrowly focus on our mission to deal with al-Qaeda and ISIS in the region. And we should end our support for the Saudi-led war in Yemen. It's hurting us. Staying entrenched in unwinnable conflicts drains our capacity to lead on so many other issues that require our attention. It prevents us from rebuilding the other instruments of American power. So I'll make it my mission to restore American leadership, elevate diplomacy as a principal tool of our foreign policy. I will reinvest in a diplomatic corps that this administration has hollowed out and put our diplomacy back in the hands of genuine professionals so you don't hear an echo on the 7th floor of the State Department any longer. Above all, diplomacy requires credibility. And Donald Trump has absolutely corroded our country's credibility. In order to gain and regain the confidence of the world, we have to prove again that America says what it means and means what it says, especially when it comes to the challenges that will define our time. The renewed threat of nuclear war.
Yet, every single promise he made before his election would be broken. Joe Biden continued the forever wars in Syria and in Yemen and in Iraq. One of the first acts he made as President of the United States was not only ordering airstrikes in Syria, but ordering airstrikes on Iranian-backed militias who were fighting the Islamic State in cities like Idlib and Raqqa.
He's been president for less than a month, or just over a month, I should say, and Joe Biden has now ordered his first military strike of his presidency. The targets were Iranian-backed Iraqi militia based in eastern Syria, just across the Iraqi border, which, according to the Pentagon, were behind at least 3 separate attacks on U.S. assets in Iraq. The most recent was last week, when a coalition base at the Erbil airport came under rocket and mortar fire. A civilian contractor was killed, 5 Americans hurt. The U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin offered few details as to what precisely was hit by these U.S. airstrikes.
We're confident in the target that we went after. We know what we hit. And we're confident that that target was being used by the same Shia militia that conducted the strikes.
For more details, here's CNN's Oren Lieberman reporting in from the Pentagon.
The airstrike against the site in eastern Syria along the Iraq-Syria border is the first known military action under President Joe Biden. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said it was his recommendation and that Biden gave the final authorization for the strikes on Thursday morning. A U.S. official familiar with the strikes said up to a handful of militants were killed in that airstrike. And they come after a series of rocket attacks against U.S. and coalition forces operating in Iraq. First in Erbil about a week and a half ago, then in Balad Air Force Base just north of the city of Baghdad, and then the Green Zone in Baghdad itself. Austin said that part of the messaging here, and Pentagon spokesman John Kirby backed this up, was first that there will be a response to these rocket attacks, and second, to deter future rocket attacks. Austin made it clear that they're confident that it was Iranian-backed Shia militias that were operating in these sites that were struck by the U.S. Air Force, and it was those same militias responsible for the rocket attacks. Up until now, the U.S. hadn't attributed the rocket attacks to anyone, but now pinpointing it on Iranian-backed Shia militias and more broadly holding Iran responsible for the actions of its proxies in Syria and in Iraq. This comes at a crucial time for the Biden administration when it comes to Iran, as it tries to figure out what to do and how to work diplomatically about Iran's nuclear program, also signaling that it wants to broaden out the agreement to include Iran's ballistic missiles and Iran's actions in the region. Oren Lieberman, CNN at the Pentagon.
The hypocrisy of the Biden administration knows no bounds, but it goes a lot deeper than this, even before he was president of the United States. Going as far back under the Obama administration, when Biden served as the vice president. In a Time article dated September 10th, 2014, President Obama and Vice President Joe Biden personally lobbied members of Congress to authorize $500 million in funding to train and arm Syrian rebels in the fight against Islamic militants in Iraq and Syria. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid and House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi spoke in Congress Wednesday in support of funding the rebels, dismissing the potential cost, in which Reid went on to say, "I believe we need to train and equip Syrian rebels. Going at it alone will not suffice." Senate Armed Services Committee Chairman Carl Levin and Senator Bob Corker, the top Republican on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, told reporters Wednesday that they support arming and training the Syrian rebels. One of the few dissenters was Tim Kaine, a Democrat out of Virginia, noted that, "I think the task has gotten harder in terms of determining how to do that in a way that the arms end up in the right hands. But I still think that can be an appropriate way to deal with the ISIS threat on the Syrian side. But I don't believe that we should fund rebels who could potentially be our enemies." Three years prior, Obama and Biden covertly approved of a CIA Saudi-led program called Timber Sycamore, in which hundreds of millions of dollars went to Syrian rebels to help to overthrow the Bashar al-Assad president and government in Syria. As for Biden being a progressive and someone who wanted to end the forever wars, this is proof that he himself was not serious about ending the wars in Syria, in Yemen, or in Iraq. As for the war on Iranian proxy forces fighting against the Islamic militants, which were once supported by the Obama and Biden administration, things began to accelerate on May 8th, 2018, when the United States withdrew from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the JCPOA nuclear deal, reinstating sanctions on Iran. Iran being a very close a close partner to the Syrian regime under Assad, considering that they are a link to Lebanon and Hezbollah. The Shia-led country is the country that is fighting against the Islamic State in Syria on behalf of the Assad regime. Meanwhile, the Saudis, the Israelis, and the CIA, with full support from the United States, began covertly funding the Syrian rebels in opposition to not only to Assad, but also to the Iranian proxy forces. The U.S. began a buildup of its military presence in the region to deter what it regarded as a planned campaign of belligerency by Iran and its non-state allies to attack American forces and interests in the Gulf and Iraq. But nothing could be further than the truth. It's the United States who is surrounding Iran at the behest of Saudi Arabia and Israel. So, when the Biden administration merely condemns the Iranians for fighting against the jihadists, something that the United States should be in support of, what does that make Joe Biden when he remarks that the January 6th insurrection was merely a terrorist plot?
A rise of political extremism, white supremacy, domestic terrorism that we must confront and we will defeat. To overcome these challenges, to restore the soul and secure the future of America, requires so much more than words. It requires the most elusive of all things in a democracy: unity. In America, if you lose, you accept the results. You follow the Constitution. You try again. You don't call facts fake and then try to bring down the American experiment just because you're unhappy. A mob of extremists and terrorists launched a violent and deadly assault on the People's House, on the sacred ritual to certify a free and fair election.
Pretty hypocritical of Biden to suggest that what took place on January 6th was mere terrorism. If that's the case, Biden should be arrested by the international courts for conducting, supporting, and aiding and abetting in terrorism. In the spring of 2011, the CIA helped arrange some of the arms purchases of the Saudis, including a large deal in Croatia in 2012. A classified U.S. State Department cable signed by Secretary of State Hillary Clinton reported that Saudi donors were a major support for Sunni militant forces globally, and some American officials worried that rebels being supported had ties to al-Qaeda. But that didn't stop the Obama and Biden administration. Timber Sycamore, according to American officials, was highly effective, training and equipping thousands of rebel fighters to make substantial battlefield gains against the Assad government. American officials stated that the program began to lose its effectiveness after the Soviet Union intervened militarily in the Syrian civil war. U.S.-backed rebels often fought alongside al-Qaeda's al-Nusra Front, and some of the U.S.-supplied weapons ended up in the hands of the al-Qaeda affiliate, which had been a major concern of the Obama administration when the program was first proposed. However, that didn't stop Obama and Biden in supporting and aiding weapons to Saudi-led militants, al-Qaeda affiliates, to help overthrow the Assad government. So, with that in mind, would that make Joe Biden himself a terrorist? And if so, who is Biden really in support of?
I used to say early on when I was a kid, I'd say, when I was a young senator, I'd say, if I were a Jew, I'd be a Zionist. I am a Zionist. You don't have to be a Jew to be a Zionist.